welcome back. I hope you had some insightful breakout sessions and some round tables and some great lunch. And, you know, to kind of introduce this next panel, I'll start by saying it's funny with general purpose technologies, right? Like the internet and electricity, because they become so foundational to our lives, so pervasive that we can't imagine life without them. We reconfigure our entire societies around them. And in fact, it's general purpose technologies that we often deem unethical when people don't get access to them. But we forget that these technologies were once radical, revolutionary inventions, with the internet starting as ARPANET, and the internet having in it embedded values in its architecture. So how might we go about in the technical and the civil solutions that we're putting forward, trying to deliver on the original values? And I can think of no better individuals, and it is such an honor to have this conversation with, than Vint Cerf and Steve Crocker, the founding figures of the modern internet, along with Mei Lin Fung. Please welcome.
God, you can't see a thing.
Hello, everyone. It's been wonderful to be with all of you at all the sessions over the last day and a half. I'm Mei Lin Fung. I co-founded the People-Centered Internet with Vint Cerf 10 years ago. And what happened was we had just celebrated the 40th anniversary of the internet. And I went to him and I said, you know what I heard? That this internet, it's of the people, by the people, and for the people. And we should stand up for that and remind people that that's what the internet was for. And Vint, being Vint, an engineer, practical, said, Mei Lin, that's too long. Let's call it the People-Centered Internet. So that's how it was founded, and Vint was the chair for 5 years, and I've been the chair for 5 years. And I'm delighted to have these two gentlemen. I met Vint through celebrating the 40th anniversary of the internet, and Vint brought in Steve Crocker to do a project with the People-Centered Internet and lead the domain name system reform. There's something that I found out by knowing these two gentlemen, which is they went to high school together. And does this matter, you wonder? Was this just a fun fact? I believe that the internet was fueled by friendship. I'm a woman and empathetic, and I say friendship. And Vint says, no, we had common cause. So with that, I'd like to bring forward these two gentlemen and ask them, what are the values and insights that you gained in the last 50 years as the internet grew? And what would you like to let people know that you discovered in your journey?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting us to join you today. This apparently has been quite an energetic several days of discussion. Steve and I have been at the National Academy of Sciences for the last 2 days, where another group is focused on the resilience of the internet, or its lack thereof, and how do we make it more resilient because we're relying on it so much. I want to start out by observing that the values that you see embedded in the internet architecture are actually a consequence of Steve Crocker's view of things and his leadership. When he was a graduate student at UCLA, and I was there with him, he was charged with the responsibility for leading what was then called the Network Working Group. And in my opinion, it was Steve's intuition that infused the social style of the institutions that you see today representing the internet, whether it's the IETF or the Internet Society or ICANN or some of the others. So Steve did two things that were very important. The first thing is that he established a very collaborative view of work. How do we build this thing? We build this thing together. It was a meritocracy. If you contributed something that worked, you got credit for it. If it didn't, you got ignored. He also recognized the importance of documentation. And so he's famous for writing RFC number 1, request for comments. And this is all fairly casual, but it was also pretty deliberate. So this leadership style was not to dictate downward, but rather to encourage upward contributions. I know it feels like you just died and I've just given you an obituary.
My turn is coming.
Yeah. But I think people don't know the extent to which your choices have really colored the way the internet institutions have evolved over time. So I just want people to know that. I think we are at an interesting stage now where the internet has become very central to an awful lot of what goes on in the world. We're very reliant on it, which is why we spent 2 days worrying about resilience. And in a way, the economics, the economy of scale and other things, the commercialization has led to concentrations. And, my company is often looked at as being one of those concentration points. Some of that happens literally because of economy of scale. But the question is, can we re-empower the people who are relying on the internet and who want to contribute to it, all of you being an example? How do we do that? How do we empower you to make those contributions like the engineers 50 years ago contributed to the ARPANET and to the internet? So that's my immediate response to your question.
Thank you. And Steve. Steve is known as the man who wrote the instructions for the internet. The RFCs, the requests for comments, was his humble way to say, come on, guys, we have to decide and move on.
Thank you. Vint passing things my way, but there's nobody sitting next to me for me to do that to. But in truth, when we got involved, Vint and I both got involved in the early days of the ARPANET, it's important to understand the context and what life was like there. The ARPANET was an overlay, an interconnection of the research laboratories that were all funded by the same source, by the Information Processing Techniques Office within the Advanced Research Projects Agency. The sites that were already supported were part of a grand vision of interactive computing, artificial intelligence, graphics. Everything that we have today was thought about, visualized, and intentionally pursued more than 50 years ago, more than 60 years ago. J.C.R. Licklider, Bob Taylor, Larry Roberts, and other core people around the community. So when we were drawn into this network, there were a couple of very salient factors. One was there wasn't any need for competition because what we were going to compete about, there was no product, there was no money involved. We were all being supported by the same thing. And the second key salient factor was we pretty well understood that we did not know enough to predict everything, that there were a few simple, obvious things. You want to move a file from one site to another. You want to be able to log into a remote machine. But those were, in a sense, kind of pedestrian, non-trivial as they turned out to be, but simple. And that far more important than defining a complete closed system was to have an open system that invited future things to happen that we couldn't even anticipate. Excuse me. So what I like to emphasize is that led to an open architecture with thin layers that you could build on, you could get around if you needed to, and so forth. It led to an open participation system where anybody could contribute, and led to open access to all of the documentation with the RFCs that Mei Lin referred to. So three three forms of openness characterized how we operated and what we tried to achieve. So the stuff that we built was important for the day, but the fact that we built it in a way that led to this embracing architecture, this embracing social culture, if you will, which eventually led to the Internet Engineering Task Force and other organizations that sprang up to do this, was the key thing. All of which was a big and important but not overwhelming piece of the much grander vision that we have today with, as I said, AI and interactive computing. Excuse me. And that really made a big difference. I don't think we set out to be contrary with the standards organizations where you had to be, where you had to pay money to get documents, and you had to be part of a government structure in order to go to international meetings to negotiate what the settlement price of long-distance calls was going to be. That just wasn't part of what most of us were thinking about. It was a question of how do we build the future. And today, of course, we have mostly done that, but in addition, there's been a bunch of emergent properties. We have very big companies that do their very best to control as much of the market as they can. We have various actors who have motives that are not the best and cause a lot of problems for us. And so balancing all of that, but boy, that's just the same as the rest of society, so here we are.
So just before you ask another question, I want to acknowledge another person who's in the room, and it's Dave Clark, who's over there. If you'll wave his hand, please. Dave. This is the visitation of the old farts. Dave was named the head of what is now called the Internet Architecture Board and served in that role for a decade at least. And he's written a fantastic book on how to design an internet. I just want to acknowledge his presence and contributions. This is, I think, a very interesting time for every one of you. We now see a system which is global in scope. It does not penetrate everywhere that we would like it to, but we see these continual evolution of access over time. Frank's brother, for example, is busily fiberizing Ireland as just one of his little weekend projects. And Elon Musk, of course, has put up the Starlink system, and there will be others that follow. So there is a huge amount of energy trying to bring more access to this commons, if we can call it that. The real question in my mind is how everyone who wants to contribute has an opportunity and is facilitated to contribute in one way or another. Steve's comment about layering is pretty important here. There are layers. It's not terribly formal, but they have some coherence. What's important is that you can contribute at any layer, because the architecture says if you don't like the protocols that are at that layer, you can add another one. And if you don't like the layers, you can add another one, which is what Tim Berners-Lee did when he added HTTP to create the World Wide Web. He just plopped that down on top of TCP/IP. And more recently, Google and the IETF introduced another layer at the transport level called QUIC, which has some characteristics that are an improvement over the TCP protocols. So there is still a very clear opportunity for people to add utility to this system. The question is, are you free to do that? And I think part of the job of this forum is to identify ways in which those contributions can be facilitated.
Thank you. And now, the big question. You guys did this in your 20s. You were very young.
Okay, so this is one of my big regrets. You know, I hear these 6-year-olds who come and say, "Hi, I'm showing my colleagues in 3rd grade, you know, how to, or 1st grade or something, how to do web pages." And I think, geez, that's not fair. We didn't get to use the internet until we were in our mid-20s, and we had to invent it first.
And now we've got the next 50 years of the internet. And do you have thoughts about what you learned from aiming so high? As Steve said, building the future. when you were young that you might be able to share with young people now today?
Well, I can tell you one thing that I am personally working very hard on with a bunch of colleagues. This is not a Google project, and that's the extension of the internet to operate across the solar system. The interplanetary system has been underway since 1998. We're already in prototype operation on Mars since 2004. We've been on the International Space Station since about 2009. We're working with ESA and JAXA and CARI on the return to the moon, the U.S. Artemis mission, the ESA Moonlight mission. So I'm very excited about that. That's quite real. That's going to happen. And the younger folks here are going to watch that unfold over time. What's very exciting is that commercialization is already happening. Companies like Intuitive Machines, the first commercial company to land something successfully on the moon. NASA has offered to buy the product of mines operating on the moon if anybody wants to do that. But what's going to be really interesting is figuring out the jurisdictional and policy questions. If you wanted to register a mine on the moon, where do you register? What if somebody disputes your claim? Where does that get resolved? What if somebody interferes with your operation? What's the Space Force supposed to do? So and it's coming soon, not 10, 20 years from now. Steve he's levitating out of his seat.
Vint had this large collection of science fiction books. And we had a slightly different, now that I reflect back on it, slightly different understanding. I thought it was fiction. He thought it was real and wanted to go after it. The interplanetary protocols is really quite spectacular. Another thing that has emerged and is coming with full force comes out of the artificial intelligence activities,
yes,
which is the understanding of language and the ability to converse, and with that, the automatic translation from one language to another. A couple of years ago, Raj Reddy put himself on publicly stated that within 10 years from this date a couple of years ago, automatic translation of any pair of 100 different languages in real time. That was complete science fiction back when we were building the network. I moved from UCLA to DARPA, and the day I arrived, I inherited a project that was just kicking off to try to make a big leap forward with respect to understanding speech. The state of the art at that time was one word at a time, and the big leap forward was connected speech in an ideal environment without any limitation on the amount of computer time and not necessarily in real time. And 50 plus years later, amazing stuff that's in our pocket that we use all the time. And if you explain to our children that it didn't exist,
This is really cool. Steve joined DARPA in 1971. He was in charge of the AI program at the time, such as it was. And part of the reason the ARPANET got built was because DARPA was investing in artificial intelligence in a number of different universities, and he wanted them to share their resources. So that was the motivation for building the thing in the first place. You got 59 seconds.
I have to thank you both, but I want to thank you both on behalf of the world. Last night at The Onion, they said, oh, yes, a whole group of people in Washington, D.C. are going to save the world. But I come from Singapore, and I want to say the opportunities that have been afforded to billions of people around the world is immeasurable, and thank you both.
Thank you. Thank you.
This is the part where we jump off the stage. Are you ready for this?
To explore a pathway to an accountable AI, please welcome to the stage the Director of Tech and Public